Well, good morning and welcome. I'm Dr. Lanny Wilson, and I'm chairing the DuPage Railroad Safety Council, and I will be your host this morning. Our council exists because the child of a family friend, Jonathan Goers, was so severely injured, and our daughter Lauren was later killed at a quiet little railroad crossing here in Hinsdale, Illinois. The deaths of these children and three others, Michael DeLarco, Victor Oliveira, and Christy Topol, who also died at railroad crossings or along railways, motivate us to press on. We have hosted railroad safety conferences every 2 years since 1996. Despite the pandemic, our members wanted to stay the course because we have a mission to accomplish after all: eliminate deaths and injuries at railroad crossings and along railways. And we just can't do that if we're sitting on the sidelines as passive bystanders. There's work to be done. So welcome to our first live virtual conference. We're glad that you decided to take time out of your busy schedules. In joining us, we welcome you as railroad safety partners. Let's get out there and save lives. Just a couple of housekeeping thoughts. Those of you in the audience, thanks for being here. Even though the panelists can't see you and they can't interact, you have the ability to ask questions. There's a Q&A option at the bottom of your screen, which you can use anytime if you think of some questions. You don't have to wait until the end of the presentations. This year, the subtitle of our conference is Keeping Families Together. The title originally was, Let's Talk About Best Practices, but as important as conversations about best practices is, these words do not speak to the heart of why our railroad safety organization exists and why we expend the effort to sponsor an international conference every other year. We do it because several of our council members have empty seats at our family table, the real life version of Tiny Tim Cratchit's absence from the family table in the Charles Dickens classic, A Christmas Carol. Those seats are empty because we have lost loved ones at railroad crossings or along railways. With resolve, we focus our efforts on ways to prevent those losses. We hope to inform and inspire our audience and anyone with influence to help in keeping families together. It is to that end that we sponsor this year's biennial Prevent Tragedy on the Tracks Symposium. We have the audacity to imagine a world with no deaths on railroad property. Here's John Lennon's Imagine to think about. Imagine no deaths on railroads. It's easy if you try. These aren't asteroid attacks. They are preventable after all. We'll be keeping families together because no one will die. Imagine all the families staying together that way. Imagine there are no suicides. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no loneliness too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope today you'll join us, keeping families together as one. Imagine no deaths on railroads. I wonder if you can. No need for conferences to prevent them. We've got it all in hand. Imagine all the people doing the right thing. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope today you'll join us, keeping families together as one. You will meet several dreamers like me as the morning progresses. They probably won't be singing though. I would like to start off by introducing you to Mr. Steve Laffey, a railroad safety specialist at the Illinois Commerce Commission in Springfield, Illinois. Steve has dedicated much of his work life to making our railways safer. I'm proud to call Steve a friend and a board member of the DuPage Railroad Safety Council. Welcome, Steve.
Well, good morning, Dr. Wilson. Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. It's really a pleasure to be here for the 13th edition of the Prevent Tragedy on the Tracks, the first virtual event, which is pretty cool. Different. It's always nice to change things up a little bit. The purpose of my presentation here this morning is to provide some background and some context on the issue of railroad safety. Specifically, I look at railroad-related fatalities. So I'm going to highlight some trends, short-term and long-term. Going to summarize the 8,419 fatalities that occurred between 2012 and 2019. I'm going to focus on just 4 subsets of those, which I call pedestrian. Those pedestrians collectively accounted for 80.1% of all the deaths. And then I'll wrap up with a little update on how we're doing with attaining the 50% reduction goal, which is not very good, actually. So what are we talking about? Well, in 2017, there were 2.8 million people who died in the United States. When I think of safety, I think the best way to measure it is in terms of fatalities, injuries, and incidents avoided. The fatality data is the easiest thing to find. So of the 2.8 million people that died in 2017, accidents were number 3, 170,000 or so. Obviously here in 2020, that's going to change. COVID is going to be number 3. Let's hope it's not number 2. Of all of our accident deaths, about 40,000 of those were transportation related, which is 1.4% of all the deaths. And then our railroad related fatalities, there was only 1,095, and they accounted for 0.04% of all the deaths in the nation in 2017. Kind of focus on railroad fatalities in general because the consequence of a train striking a human or a vehicle is a lot more severe than your regular highway accident. So in the past, this is the 3rd edition of this presentation, Focus on Fatalities. In 2016, I just had 4 categories. Now in 2020, I've made it up to 8. So it gives a good view about who exactly is being killed on railroad property. Not necessarily all deaths that occur on railroad property are due to a train strike. Some could be due to just trespassing or an assault, a murder, electrocution, and things like that. But in terms of pedestrians, the categories I'm talking about, those have increased substantially over time. So when we look at rates, on the next slide here, the orange squares are the rates of highway fatalities per 100 million miles of vehicle travel, VMT. Long-term highway rates have declined dramatically by 67%. Short-term, not so much, a little more modest of a decrease of 3.5%. When you look at the blue diamonds, that's the railroad rates, and that's the fatality rate per million train miles of operation. Again, a good long-term decrease of about 21%, but in the short term, 2012 to 2019, not good at all. In fact, the rate is up by 27.1%. So the next slide kind of focuses on just the short-term railroad deaths to kind of highlight the issue. You can see in 2012, 945 deaths. And in 2019, that's ballooned up to 1,112 with no changes in definitions or data or anything else. There was a major change in FRA definitions in 2011, which is specifically why I'm using the 2012 to 2019 data. So to look at the type of person by year, the big category there in the middle, trespass not at a crossing, accounts for about 45% of all of our deaths. On the left-hand side there, the suicide not at crossings is about 26, 27%. Those 2 categories alone get you about 70% of all railroad-related fatalities. If you add in the pedestrians at crossings that were just a regular collision, as well as those that were suicides, you get up to the 80.1% of all deaths that are pedestrians on the railroad in the United States between 2012 and 2019. So there's a lot of nuances in the data. There'll be some migration between 2019 numbers for trespassing, and some of those will be converted to suicides as time goes on. So the donut here kind of focuses and reemphasizes that the 4 stars, the trespass not at crossing, the suicides of pedestrians and other non-motorized at crossings, the suicides not at crossings, and the crossing incidents that involve pedestrians and other non-motorized users give us that 80.1% value, which is really the main focus. So when you start to look at the type of railroad operation, the Class 1 freights, they accounted for 61% of all deaths. Their numbers have been increasing over time from 577 up to 670. Your smaller local and regional freights account for a small percentage of deaths, 5.3%. Their numbers have actually been declining over time, which is good to see. The American Short Line Railroad Institute has got a safety program. Maybe that's making an effect on how fatalities are occurring. Amtrak accounts for 15% of all deaths. Their numbers have increased substantially since 2012. And our commuter railroads in particular account for 18% of all deaths, but their numbers have really exploded since 2012. There were 174 commuter-related fatalities in 2012, up to 231 in 2019. That's a 32% increase. So just to take a little look at suicides, suicides present a very special challenge. First of all, the manner of death has to be determined by a medical examiner or a coroner for a fatality to be counted as a suicide. That in itself is probably leading to a significant undercount of the true number of suicides. In general, 85% of our suicides did not occur at a crossing, and the other 15% primarily were pedestrians at crossings. Oh, you're good. Okay. So we get to the focus on pedestrians by 80.1%. These have increased from 738 in 2012 up to 909 in 2019, a 23% increase just in the number. So this kind of highlights a couple of issues. First of all, the perception of who's dying on railroad property. Most people think it's going to be somebody in a vehicle at a crossing, but only 15% of those incidents resulted in a fatality. Also highlights the funding issue. There's roughly somewhere between $400 million and $600 million spent every year on railroad safety that involves the public, primarily at crossings. And that is primarily at crossings. Here in the state of Illinois, we are restricted from spending any money outside the footprint of a crossing. So that's a major policy issue. When you start to look at fatalities by some of the variables, say by month, the fewest occurred in February, not really a surprise, and the most in July. When you look at them by the hour of day, the fewest occurred at 4 a.m. and the most at 6 p.m. The next slide there, please, Ashley. There we go. So you can see 400 occurred in the PM peak, probably the worst time of day to have an accident on your system. A death investigation can take your system down for an hour to 4 hours easily. When you start to look at things by gender and age, gender is only available for the highway rail crossing accidents. It's about 2,300, and the vast majority of those, 74%, involved men. And that kind of holds true for trespassing and suicides as well, based upon some previous research we've done. The mean age for all 8,419 fatalities was 40.6. The mean age for trespassing and suicides not at crossings is about 38, but the mean age for pedestrians at crossings and the suicide of a pedestrian at crossing is a bit higher at 45. So these are not kids. These are older folks who probably know better and know where they're at. So to wrap up here, the goal is a long way off. In 2016, we established a goal where we wanted to see a 50% reduction by 2026. As you can see in 2019, that should have gotten us down to 839 in terms of the number of fatalities, but we're at 1,112. So how are we going to get there? Well, we need to turn to our partners like local communities. And to do that, I'd like to introduce the moderator of our first panel this morning, Rodney Craig. Rod is the village president of Hanover Park, where he's lived since 1974 and is now in his 4th term as village president. And he is a retired guy. Amazingly enough, he's a mayor of a community of 37,000. He's a member of Metro's board of directors. He's been involved with the DRSC now for quite some time and has held numerous leadership roles with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Illinois Municipal League, DuPage Mayors and Managers, and like organizations. So the bottom line is that Mayor Craig has been an extremely strong advocate for transportation and transportation safety. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mayor Craig. Thank you.
Here we go. Well, thank you, Steve, for that fine introduction. We are blessed to have you with us today. Additionally, I'm pleased to moderate the panel of mayors and government leaders, our trials, tribulations, hopes, and aspirations. Our focus will reflect on our personal experiences working with freight, passenger, or commuter railroad safety issues within our community. We are not directing any answers, however, we seek solutions. Best practices that will provide or assist our community leaders a pathway to find those solutions. We look forward to hearing key leaders identified in this conference who will share their insight and knowledge, which will be appreciated. We do hope to draw upon collective wisdom shared during this conference, the collective experience to help those attending who work in and manage the safety of the railroad industry. Better to understand the rail safety matters from a government leader's perspective. Our panel participants this morning are Diane McGinley, President of the Village of Glen, Ellyn, Catherine Adduci, President Village of River Grove, Illinois, and Megan Keskitalo will be joining her, and Jessica Jennings, the Associate Legislative Director, National Association of Counties. I would like at this time to introduce our first panelist, Diane McGinley, who has lived in Glen, Ellyn for 17 years with her family. Diane was village trustee from 2011 through 2015, and again in 2016. She became president of the village in 2017. Diane is focused on development projects that improve resident safety, increased resident communications, and inclusion during her terms of service. Her drive to include more voices and opinions on the village has resulted in improved developments, such as the proposed new metro station and pedestrian underpass. Diane, how nice to have you with us this morning.
Thank you so much. There we go. Thank you for inviting me to speak before you today, and thank you for all that worked so hard to put this event together. I'm honored to be here and share my stories. In these uncertain times, it is critical to continue your efforts to improve safety on the rail lines. Rail safety is important, extremely important to me, both personally and as the village president. Unfortunately, Glen Ellyn has seen a fair share of incidents in the last several years. As a resident and as part of the village board, I am saddened and alarmed by our numbers of railroad incidents in our village, all of which have significantly affected our community. Glen Ellyn and Lombard share a stretch of the railroad that have seen a number of incidents. This is the area where the tracks go over I-355 and enter Glen Ellyn going west. The incidents reach into our downtown, but the majority are east along this stretch. The DuPage Railroad Safety Council's goal of reducing railroad deaths by 50% within 10 years is not only vital to our community, but it is necessary and noble. The ripple effects of each incident are far-reaching and devastating. Several years ago, a 10-year-old boy and his mother rode the train to Glen Ellyn. They were meeting their dad for a family funeral. Upon exiting the train at the main platform, the boy saw his dad. He excitedly ran across that platform, not noticing another train was coming. Within weeks, that very platform was removed, citing safety concerns. Now, we also have a voice signal stating, "Warning, another train is coming." Gratefully, we have not had another incident in that exact spot since then. However, since that time, numerous other incidents have occurred. In 2019 alone, Glen Ellyn experienced 3 suicides, all occurring within 2,500 feet of each other, near that very same stretch that was mentioned earlier, the Lombard-Glen Ellyn border, where the tracks go over I-355 and where the right-of-way in this area is very accessible. To gain a sense of what one life ending on the railroad is like for our community, let me expand on the April 2019 incident. On April 1st, 2019, a 15-year-old boy, well loved by his family and community, he ended his life by entering the tracks and stepping in front of a train. The accessibility was easy, too easy for that young boy. From this one action, a family was thrown into deep grief. The nearby high school and residential homes that surrounded the scene, many heard the guttering screams of the mom as she identified her boy, actually his shoes, and can still hear those screams today. The students, most especially the vulnerable freshman class, had to face that they did not save their beloved friend. Since the tracks run alongside our school and through the backyard of many homes, many of the students would sit and stare at the trains going by for weeks after the incident. Many kids still sit in their backyards, even to this day, 1.5 years later, staring at the trains that go through their yards, thinking of their friend. Many visited the site where he accessed the tracks, which is still extremely accessible. Luckily, our community rallied around these kids, providing much needed support and counseling, hoping to avoid another incident. That one school that runs right where that incident happened holds over 2,200 students, now all exposed to the idea of using trains to end your life. Glen Ellyn has another high school as well, along with 2 junior highs, 8 elementary schools, and not counting the private schools here. All now exposed to suicide by train. All now know where the easy access points are. That April suicide, it wasn't even the first or the last suicide of 2019. That was our second. Glen Ellyn still had one more to experience along that very same stretch. When the 10-year-old crossed that platform, it was ripped out quickly. The stretch of railroad between Glen Ellyn and Lombard does not have a platform to rip out, but that does not mean safety could not be improved. That 10-year-old boy, he was a pure accident, but that does not mean you cannot try to help and prevent all deaths. Putting a few roadblocks, a fence, a monitor system, a sign, anything to make someone pause, even for a second, might just make the difference. Isn't it worth trying? Both safety concerns are equally as important and warrant real safety attention. Just think what any measure of added safety might have done for any one of those that have lost their lives in that stretch. Even those that lost their lives in 2019, those that have lost their lives since then, any that are still to come in 2020 and beyond. Because sadly, we know more will come. I haven't even mentioned the other accidents on the line, such as the woman who accidentally turned onto the tracks thinking it was a road, or the cars that got stuck on the tracks from the ice, from the steep grading at the crossings. Most of those accidents were visible enough that the people who witnessed them jumped into action. They put their own lives at risk to save those that were confused or stuck. The vehicles may not have escaped, but the people did. The next incident may not have such a lucky outcome. The goal of reducing rail deaths by 50% over 10 years is noble and worthy. You will never truly know the number that you saved by increasing the safety of the rail line. The possibilities are staggering. Thank you again for this opportunity to share my community's experience. Any safety improvement is not only welcome, it's heroic. Thank you.
Diane, thank you. And think I control my video, but I'll start my video. There we go. All right. Diane, that was amazing, and it reinforces for me the heart of a mayor. Where the rubber hits the road, we feel the impacts, our neighbors, our friends, and moving forward. So I thank you so much for your comments this morning. I also have an enthusiastic mayor in Catherine Adduci of River Forest. This story is about two women who came to the DuPage Railway Safety Committee meeting. And I remember leaving that meeting and going directly to the site in question in River Forest to check it out. Catherine, our next guest, who is a longtime River Forest resident, has been the village president of the village of River Forest since 2013. Kathy's most important priority throughout her 2 terms in office has been the health and safety of the community. And she has fought hard for her residents by engaging at all levels of state and federal governments. For example, along with Senator Lightfoot, Kathy and the village's administration collaborated with Union Pacific and Metra to improve the quality of life for residents living along the 3rd Main Line expansion project. Kathy's extensive executive leadership skills, blending elected public service, civic engagement, and a distinguished executive career of over 33 years at Unisys Corporation, a Fortune 500 company. She's pleased to be here by Zoom with her resident and colleague, Megan Keskitalo, to discuss their journey of finding real solutions to railroad safety. And Megan is a River Forest resident and co-founder of the River Forest Rail Traffic Pollution Protection Group, a 501c3 organization aimed at promoting rail safety within the River Forest community. Ms. Keskitalo is trained in biological anthropology, participatory action research, and statistics, and her work includes environmental toxicology and noise pollution. She has worked in public health, education, and wealth management. As a resident of River Forest, Ms. Keskitalo resides close to the Union Pacific West Line and has engaged with her community and neighbors to work with Union Pacific and Metra to improve livability and safety along the stretch of tracks abutting their homes. The group is proud their efforts in collaboration with the Village of River Forest, State Senator Kimberly A. Lightfoot, Union Pacific, and Metra have resulted in an increase in safety, a reduction in trespassing on the rail line, and noise reduction along the UPW 3rd Main Line expansion Eastern action. Wow, Catherine and Megan, good morning. You have the floor.
Well, thank you and good morning. Thank you very much, Mayor Craig. Believe me, I know how difficult it is to pronounce last names, so I often just go with the first names. So thank you.
Good advice.
No, my name's always mispronounced. So it is so good to be here today by Zoom on this panel. And I want to thank the DuPage Railroad Safety Council for inviting Megan and I to attend this very important meeting. And I'm also pleased to be here with a resident who has firsthand experience of railroad safety. Megan lives along the UP and Metra train lines and has been living with the 3rd Main Line expansion project for years. I will let Megan discuss our issues and what we did at Village Hall to ensure River Forest remains a safe community. And as village president, I am committed to safety for all in our community. So let me introduce you to Megan.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you to the DSRC and to Mayor Craig for inviting me today. I'm very pleased to be here. This is such an important topic. I do live very close to the Union Pacific West Line, and we are very impacted by the 3rd Main Line expansion project here. Some of our homes are as close as 25 feet away from the tracks. So I'll take you through a little bit of a timeline of what we've worked with. In 2016, our village granted approval for the project. It didn't seem like there would be much impact in the village of River Forest. We had just a small section of the project going through our village. So it didn't seem like it was that big of a deal. Well, in 2018, my neighbors learned differently. They first noticed that there was fencing being removed along the tracks. They didn't know why, and that trees were being clear cut behind our homes to provide additional access to the tracks. And all of a sudden, an access road was put in. So we, of course, immediately called the village and called Kathy and got Kathy and our village administrator, Eric Palm, involved. We met with them and we met with Union Pacific, and we learned a lot about the project. But we learned while it was started and not before, which maybe would have been better. So we met with them and we tried to work with Union Pacific to get some safety features put in, but we found that to be quite difficult. And as time went on, we noticed that that access road was providing just free access right onto the tracks, that people were coming up the tracks to walk, to play. Families were taking bike rides on the Union Pacific West line. That train line has 150 trains a day. And this is an area where we had previously experienced a fatality. We knew exactly what could happen. And you'll see on my next slide what we were worried about the most as we go forward. This is a picture of the Vale switch signal. That's a switch signal that's showing trains where to go, when to stop, when to go, and when to change tracks, as they had gone from 3 tracks to 2 tracks right in this area. And as you'll see, there are children above the trains. That's a moving freight train. And we were so concerned about our residents and our children who didn't necessarily have the intellectual capacity to realize what danger they were in. So we brought the issue back up with the village. We said, we must do something. It's so dangerous here. It's so loud. And we were so concerned about the children. Kathy and Eric jumped right in. They were so concerned for us. They wanted to make sure that we were getting our needs met. We met with Union Pacific, but we found it was really difficult to get their attention, to really get them to take this seriously. And I felt like we were out of options. So we came to the DuPage Railroad Safety Council, where we were reinvigorated. We received such good advice about who we needed to talk to, how we needed to approach, the letters that we needed to write, the people we needed to address. And then we came back to our village and we really started to engage with President Adduci in working with Union Pacific and Metra, and particularly Senator Lightford. And maybe President Adduci, you could talk a little bit about your experience with working with the rail bodies and Senator Lightford.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Megan. Yes. You know, we realized when the residents, and there were a few, Megan, I would say there was at least 20 of the residents that appeared before us, and you could hear in their voices they were concerned about the safety and the well-being of our community and those that visit our community. So we reached out to both our state representative, Chris Relch, as well as Senator Lightford, and we explained how important it was that we needed to collaborate with the railroad, both Union Pacific and Metra. And to our delight, both Metra and UP did come to the table with some discussion. And I think, it just, we needed to, the big challenge was for us is to just keep talking. And I think, when UP and Metra understood what we were trying to do, I believe that, they wanted to help. They wanted to collaborate. And they knew that, it was difficult because, what we were asking for, although it wasn't a lot, it was something that they needed to, they knew that they needed to fix. So, although it was a little longer than we expected, I think that collectively between the residents, the administration, the village, myself, and our state and state representatives, I think working with the Union Pacific and Metra, I believe we made significant progress against that challenge of safety and health for our community and those that visit our community.
Yes, and so what we found is that we were able to get some success, and you'll see here some pictures of the fencing that exists behind our homes now. That is an 8-foot tall fence, and you will see that it goes all the way from the interlocking to the Des Plaines River. So there's not an opportunity to trespass behind our homes anymore. There's not an opportunity to get onto the tracks. There's a gate if the railroad needs to access it. And things are much safer. The way that it's safer to me is that I don't hear what I heard before, which was the frantic screaming of train horns warning people to get off of the tracks. Now I only hear the horns when they should be blown at an at-grade railroad crossing that's near us. I don't hear that same kind of frantic blowing. And I think our keys to success have been early engagement, state support, having really great leadership from our village, clear asks and proposed solutions. Eric Palm proposed a noise reduction material that's done very well for us, and continued citizen engagement throughout the process. It can take a long time, and I think people need to know that up front, that it might be more than a couple of years before you get your answers. And then a deep knowledge of the relevant federal regulations and guidelines, strategic media usage. We had a great partner in the Wednesday Journal through this journey, and a lot of persistence. So thank you.
Well, thank you, ladies. Catherine, Megan, I will use your suggestion and avoid last names when possible. It's always my challenge. I certainly like ending the segment with the county perspective. Liz Chaplin, of DRSC board member and member of the DuPage County Board, reached out to Jessica Jennings with the National Association of Counties. We are thrilled to have Jessica with us today. Ms. Jessica Jennings serves as an Associate Legislative Director for Transportation and Infrastructure at the National Association of Counties, NACO. In this role, Jessica staffs NACO's Transportation Policy Steering Committee, working with county officials from across the nation to determine federal advocacy, strategies for transportation and infrastructure, issues impacting counties. Prior to joining NACO, Jessica served as a policy advisor in the Office of Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs at the U.S. General Services Administration, worked in private consulting, and also spent 5 years as a personal staff member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Jessica, it's a real pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and thanks to all of you for inviting me. As you just heard from the Mayor, my name is Jessica Jennings, and I do serve as the Associate Legislative Director for the National Association of Counties. In that role, I'm responsible for transportation and infrastructure issues, most of them anyways. Infrastructure, obviously, as you guys know, is a very broad term. So again, great to be here with you, and it was great to hear from the first two presenters. I'm going to provide a different perspective that's much more of a 30,000-foot overview, but nothing replaces, obviously, the experiences of you guys that are on the front lines and dealing with these issues every day. So with that, we will get started. I think I'm advancing slides. Yes, perfect. So just briefly, you'll see this slide about how counties work with the Federal Railroad Administration. I'm sure you're aware they work with local communities to plan framework. You know, it doesn't always go well, and it doesn't always end up being a favorable experience for local communities, which is, you know, something that we're working on at NACO. You know, we try to work with the FRA to tackle as many issues as we can from a national advocacy perspective. So you can see a few bullets there. You know, the one bullet I would point out is that according to USDOT, over 2/3 of America's freight actually originates in rural counties. I know DuPage County is a very large county. I'm sure you have some rural spots, and you know, the infrastructure in these areas are already so under-maintained due to financial constraints that, you know, the freight traffic puts obviously even more wear and tear on these local roads. So that's another issue, but something I definitely wanted to mention. So moving on to the next slide, I'll just briefly cover kind of how we tackle transportation issues at NACO. We have a transportation policy steering committee. I'm sure you know Jim Healy, who I will talk about later in this presentation, but he is a vice chair of our committee. It's made up of over 150 elected and appointed officials who work in the transportation industry in their communities. So a way that we advance rail issues is through a rail and transit subcommittee that is obviously dedicated to those priorities for counties. And here you'll see just kind of our general language about rail. NACO believes there should be a coordinated federal, state, and local effort to return rail service to its appropriate place in a balanced national transportation system. In this effort, NACO supports expanding and improving long distance passenger service and provided needed regulatory reform at the federal level. And then you'll see some of our commissioners who got to go out to the Transportation Technology Center last year to visit and learned a lot about rail safety out there. So for our next slide, I won't cover all of these. You can see this is just to give you kind of a glimpse at our platform language, and we have a variety of items regarding rail. So you'll see we have language on freight rail, Amtrak, short line railroads, and high-speed rail. But obviously the most important aspect of our platform language is the rail safety priorities. It's also the biggest, as you'll see here, providing additional, generally they all relate to requesting additional funds for local governments, the state, and railroads, to kind of try to maintain crossings, to try to eliminate at-grade crossings, and you'll see to implement a variety of safety findings that are based on data, et cetera. And you can find all of this language on NACO.org. So I won't read it all, but as you'll see there, it does mention section 130 and the grade separations. And I know that's what we've been talking about here today. I think I went backwards. Sorry about that. There we go. So this is just some data I found. I know we heard from Steve, who had amazing statistics and analysis earlier on statistics like this. I have some very general slides, but I think what you can see there very clearly, right, is that the number of fatalities at grade crossings fell dramatically, and now it's again on the rise. And so with that, we know that there's an issue, and we know that this is obviously a concern for counties because the majority of these at-grade crossings are located within our local communities. So advancing to the next slide, in doing some research for this event, I found that Illinois ranks 5 in collisions at-grade crossings. So obviously this is, a really big issue for the state. And I thought it was also interesting that the top 5 that you see there, Texas, California, Florida, and Indiana, and Illinois, make up over 1/3 of all the collisions and fatalities in America. The fatalities is closer to 40% actually. And they also account for, 1/4 of all of America's at-grade crossings. So, that obviously adds to the number, but nonetheless, states and local governments, with less or more crossings all across the country need help from our federal partners, as well as the railroads to, ensure the safety of all of our residents. To us, even one collision, injury, or fatality is too much. And I know you guys would agree with that. So moving on, this is where I will once again talk about Jim Healy. So, in reaction, obviously, to Illinois' problem and noting that this is much bigger than just Illinois, our committee and Jim introduced this resolution, which is a way that we advance our county priorities and kind of set advocacy goals for NACO to meet. So you'll see the issue there. You already know what the issue is. At-grade crossings are a problem in a variety of different ways. They create congestion, they create traffic, and they pose significant risk of injury or death for motor vehicles and pedestrians. So you'll see the issue. You'll see the adopted policy there. So NACO adopted a policy. Counties urge Congress to create a new discretionary grant program, providing federal funding opportunities for counties desiring to eliminate at-grade rail crossings. And we actually were successful in getting this into the House bill, HR 2, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. But you'll see there on July 1st, the bill did pass the House, and it did contain a new discretionary program that is very similar to what is described in Board Member Healy's resolution. So you'll see this slide, HR 2, it's the Moving Forward Act. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but generally it's a $1.5 trillion package. It is a comprehensive infrastructure package, but the first four titles of the bill, the first four divisions of the bill, A through D, are a surface transportation reauthorization. Within the surface transportation reauthorization, within the rail title, is where this program is located. So it is a new, like I said, $2.5 billion grant program that is over 5 years. So you'll see the breakdown as it goes by fiscal year below on the slide. That these would be direct competitive funding opportunities. Counties could apply directly to US DOT for these funds. The eligible activities for these funds include the installation, repair, improvement of grade crossing separations, eliminating at-grade crossings, and carrying out any related necessary environmental mitigation activities that are necessary for the project. We're very excited about this, and we think it really does, answer our resolution. We're couldn't be happier. Unfortunately, it's not quite across the finish line yet. I'll speak more about that in a moment. So our next slide just has a few more provisions from HR 2. It also created a new rail safety public awareness grant program. We do think the funding is a little low on that. It's $5 million a year, which is kind of a drop in the bucket in some ways, but it is a start nonetheless, and a sign, our lawmakers are realizing that, education is a big part of this process. Just as much as, we heard from Megan, putting up a fence behind, people need to know this is not a place to play. This is not a place to walk. This is not a place to be generally as a pedestrian, so we think that this legislation is really kind of trending in the right way. Another big issue for counties, not as much safety, but, kind of more economic, I guess. It creates a 10-minute time limit for blocked crossings. So for any train blocking a public crossing, 10 minutes, it would also give US DOT the authority to penalize train operators that are in violation, which is great, because this is a concern I hear about more and more from folks. Again, creates congestion, it decreases efficiency, all sorts of, kind of ripple effects, none of which are positive. So HR 2 right now, oops, sorry about that. HR 2 right now currently awaits action in the Senate. It does not have a great path forward. However, obviously, I'm sure everyone knows the election is coming up in a mere 2 weeks. So once that happens, it could have a clearer path. Either way, we feel that those safety provisions in the bill are definitely something everyone can wrap their arms around. So we hope to see that in a final package. And obviously, we'll be working with lawmakers to secure that. So with that, thank you again so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I think we're moving into a Q&A, so I'm happy to take any questions at that point. And just want to say, listening to the panelists today, you guys are doing great work. Nothing compares to being boots on the ground and dealing with these issues on the front line. So thanks again.